To read on just that from Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford. He's a member of the Intel Committee, among others. Senator, what do you think of that? That in the end, this really comes down to recognizing we can't trust this, this guy and the people around him, and that ultimately the only way to assure cooperation down the road is that he not be there.
He has been the brutal dictator, and the people around him have answered yes to every single statement that he has made, because if they don't, he has them executed publicly. And he is not afraid to be able to take military leaders, put them on a post, and kill them with an anti-aircraft gun for public execution. So he has been a ruthless dictator, despite all the pictures of him smiling and walking through the streets in Singapore, and we should be keenly aware of that as we're negotiating with him. Now, if he wants his people, and he has any compassion for the people and the millions of folks that live in squalor and poverty in North Korea, he will set aside his nuclear weapons, and so they have the opportunity to have electricity and food and the opportunities that the rest of the world around them has.
Do you really think he cares, though?
Well, we're about to find out.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
That's the big issue, is if he comes to this agreement and comes to it and says, I'll set aside all these nuclear weapons, the United States is very willing to be able to lean in and provide economic engagement. We're not going to just pour millions of dollars on them, but if they open up their economy and they're able to set aside nuclear weapons, they could be as prosperous as South Korea is. There's a great example of what communism and free markets look like when you look at North Korea and South Korea, a very, very prosperous South Korea, and the North Koreans that live in squalor and poverty.
It is kind of weird, for whatever reasons, though, Senator, that we have a situation where we're alienating or talking nasty about our friends, like the Canadians and the Germans and all those in the G7, maybe for perfectly valid reasons. They would argue otherwise. And we're cozying up to this guy.
Well, I would hope the president's not cozying up to this guy. We have very strong sanctions on him. We're watching out for their illegal transportation of any kind of goods leaving out still. We're still working diplomatically around the world to be able to isolate North Korea. So our sanctions in place, we're continuing to apply pressure, but it's entirely reasonable to say we're not applying pressure so we never talk. We're applying pressure to force us all to the table so we actually talk and get to an agreement. So if you're going to apply strict sanctions, the reason for those sanctions is to get to the table that they're headed to in about 12 hours from now. And so they can get to that table, get a resolution, come out of it with a first step. And I have no optimism that everything gets resolved today, but I do have some optimism that they can at least lay the groundwork for the next meeting. And usually the next meeting is when you start getting some things actually resolved.
The fact that they're talking, to your point, is something in and of itself. And as I was raising with the prior guys, we can't pick and choose the leaders of the country with whom we meet. And the hope is, at least from this administration, talking to the other administration, North Korea, is that they will change their ways. Their history is that they don't, that they lie and they cheat and they find ways around things, sometimes waiting years to not live up to those accords. You talk about the Ronald Reagan approach of, trust but verify, but even when we were trying to verify, they were changing the rules midstream. So how do we avoid that this go round?
Well, you keep strict sanctions on. You do what the Trump administration is doing wisely in that, and that is keep the sanctions going, keep the pressure on them, and when things change, not with words, but with behavior, then we begin to back off and to begin to loosen that up. But you've got to have a clear set of guidelines.
But in the past, they did change with behavior, Senator. You know what I mean? So you could be hoodwinked into thinking, oh, well, they are doing what we said.
Typically in the past, the North Koreans would say, we will test a nuclear weapon, we will test a missile if the rest of the world doesn't give us food aid and money. And so we would give them money. They would not do a nuclear test. They would not test a missile for 5, 6, 7 years, and then they would do it again, and we would go through cycle after cycle. If this challenge is, no, we're going to talk about actually dismantling your facilities, burying other things, setting aside the potential to have that, having clear inspections, then you let off sanctions. That is very different.
All right, sir, thank you very, very much. Very good seeing you.
You bet. Good to see you as well.